everyone. I'm glad that you could join us today. Can you hear me? Jeremy, you're hearing me okay?
Yep, I can hear you good.
Very good. Alrighty, good afternoon. First, I want to start off by remembering that today is Memorial Day. I want to take a second to remember those who fought and died for our freedoms, so join me in remembering them. Thank you to Jeremy Daubert for inviting me to speak, and I hope that I can help you prepare to submit your application for this new program. As Jeremy said, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them in the chat box so that not everybody is speaking at the same time, and then we can unmute the phones at the end if you would like to verbally ask questions, and I'll try to stop along the way and answer some of the questions. So let's begin. The program that has come about is the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. And some general information on that is it was brought about by the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Stability Act, or the CARES Act, and the CCC Charter Act authorized by the Secretary to implement CFAP, and it's in 7 CFR Part 9 if you like to read federal regulations. CFAP provides direct assistance to agricultural producers impacted by the effects of COVID-19. And the two funding sources are the CARES Act, which is $9.5 billion, and the CCC Charter Act, which provides $6.5 billion. The sign-up period for this program is May the 26th, 2020 through August the 28th, which that is tomorrow through August the 28th. There is some miscommunication out there that people were afraid that funds were going to run out. It is not true. There should be funding for everyone. You don't have to rush to get it done by tomorrow. Funding will be available. So that is one thing to note. So who is eligible? Producers with ownership risk of identified commodities that have suffered a 5% or greater national price loss as a result of the pandemic or had substantial marketing cost of inventories. And those include milk, specialty crops, wool, livestock, and specialty crops. And there's a new term that I want everybody to understand. Your commodities must have been subject to price risk. That's any production, sales, and/or inventory that is not subject to an agreed upon price in the future through forward contracting agreements or similar binding document. And this applies to all eligible commodities. So that's, for instance, if you had soybeans that were forward contracted in the fall of last year that you didn't sell until, or you didn't get rid of until February, let's say, those would need to be reduced from your inventory on hand. The following forms are applicable to CFAP, and I'll go into more detail about these. The first one is the CFAP application. The 902, which is a farm operating plan, which you can call your local FSA office. They will ask you some questions and help you fill out that form. The CCC 901 is a member information for legal entities, and it lists the members of the entity who has signature authority and their percent shares. The 941 is the average adjusted gross income form, which is basically asking if you make less than $900,000 a year. If you in fact make more than $900,000 a year, income minus expenses but before charitable contributions, then you can certify that your income comes majority from farming, or 75%. You would do that on the 942. And then there's the 80-1026 highly erodible land conservation and wetland certification. Those are all of the eligibility forms. The CFAP application is one application for each producer. So you may have livestock, dairy, and corn all on one application. You only need one application, and it is producer certification. Documentation is only required upon spot check or when it is requested by the COC. They can be completed and submitted to any USDA service center. So if you fly to California and think to yourself, I didn't sign up for the program, you can go into a local FSA office, submit your application, and they will forward it to the recording county responsible for acting on the application. You may want to note that you're from Virginia if you are, so that it gets to the right place. This is an example of what the application will look like, I want you to pay close attention to Part A, the producer agreement. It basically explains all of the forms that you will need to complete. It also includes permission, if you're pulled for spot check, for us to request those documents. To pay close attention to the producer agreement. The first items that you will start to fill out is the producer information, where you put in your name and address. Then you will select the areas that are applicable to you. The first part is the dairy production information in Part C. Part D is the non-specialty crop and wool information. That's where soybeans and corn and wool go. Part E is the livestock information. Part F is value loss information. Part G is specialty crop information. And Part H needs to be noted to any corporations, LLCs, or limited partnerships. If someone provides more than 400 hours of active personal labor or management, they can have an increased payment limitation, and they would need to certify to that on this section here. And then finally, Part I is where you're going to sign. If you are signing for an entity, you need to be sure that you put in your title for the entity. So if you're an LLC, sometimes it's a member or manager, you need to list that in 39B. So that covers the application. Payments will be based on specific payment rates that you can review on the website at www.farmers.gov/CFAP. Or I will briefly go over them in this discussion, and you will receive 80% of the calculated payment. Subsequent payments will be issued at a later date as determined by the secretary, but you will only receive 80% at this time to ensure everyone receives a payment. So more about those eligibility forms and payment limitation. To be eligible for CFAP payment, a producer must have had a share in an eligible commodity on January 15th, 2020. This is something to take note of. January 15th, 2020 is an important date, and or April 16th through May the 14th. In addition, the producer must be a citizen or U.S. national, resident alien, partnership of citizens or nationals of the United States, a corporation, LLC, or organizational structure organized under state law, Indian tribes, and foreign persons. If you have a question whether or not you are eligible, contact your local FSA office. Ineligible producers are federal and state local governments, including public schools, persons or legal entities who did not have or reported ownership interest in eligible commodities, persons and legal entities suspended or debarred or otherwise excluded from participating in programs, and persons that do not meet payment limitation, payment eligibility, adjusted gross income, or highly erodible and wetland requirements for CFAP. So the eligibility forms, just to go over a few of those in more detail, the CCC 902 is required to be completed by all CFAP applicants. At a minimum, we will need your name, address, tax ID number for you and the legal entity, any of the members, member information for legal entities such as the percentage shares, citizenship status, and contributions of foreign persons. The 902 that you have on file, if you are currently a participant in FSA, will be sufficient. You do not have to provide more information if you've already participated, but if you're new, you will have to complete this form. It's very important that I note that if you have not historically participated with FSA, all of the eligibility forms must be on file within 60 days of the date of signing your application. And failure to do that will result in no payment or reduced payment. So it's very, very important that you get all eligibility forms in within that 60-day time frame. The general rule is individuals or legal entities will be limited to $250,000 payment limitation. Payments to joint operations, including general partnerships or joint ventures, cannot exceed $250,000 per person or legal entity that comprise first level ownership of the general partnership or legal entity. unless the first level member is another joint operation. So basically it's $250,000 for entities and people. There is the optional increase in $250,000 limitation for applicants for that are corporations, LLCs, and partnerships, and that must be requested in Part H of the application. That is the part that I had noted. And for those individuals, the optional payment limitation increase for applicants who are corporations and LLCs can increase to either $500,000 or $750,000. This is based on the number of members or partners that are contributing 400 hours or more of active personal labor or active personal management or combination thereof. And if you have questions whether or not you have provided active personal labor or management, you can contact your FSA office. So for instance, if you have an entity where none of the members are providing labor management or a combination thereof, they are limited to $250,000. One person providing 400 hours is $250,000. Two people providing at least 400,000 get the $500,000, and 3 persons get $750,000. And I don't know who marked on the screen, but it is there. Payment limitation, the payment factor. The initial payment will be factored by 80% of the calculated payment, and it will be applied after applying payment limitation. So the maximum amount a person or legal entity may receive is $200,000, but for corporations and LLCs qualifying for the optional increase and limitation may receive a maximum of $400,000 and $600,000 respectively. And then subsequent payments will be made or determined by the secretary at a later date. The adjusted gross income requirements, as I discussed earlier, the effective year is going to be the base years of 2016, 2017, and 2018. You can find this information on your taxes, and you can determine whether or not your income is more than or less than $900,000. And if it is more than $900,000, then at least 75% has to be derived from farming and ranching. So now I'm going to go into the conservation compliance part of it. This is the part that confuses people a little bit more, but it is something that you can ask your local FSA office if you have questions. It applies to the crop year 2020, and it's a continuous certification on the AD 1026. So if you have historically participated, you likely have one of these on file. For CFAP, there's additional certifications in Part A of the producer agreement. That is the area that I told you to pay attention to on the application. And it's Part 7, 7A, 7B, and 8. And this is the certification of compliance, basically to comply with the provisions of the Food Security Act in 1985 to protect highly erodible land and wetlands. All applicants must complete and submit all portions of the 1026 unless they fit into one of the below categories. This will all make more sense if you review the actual form. Producers meeting the parameters of 7A of the application can certify on the 1026 with box 5B if the producer does not participate in any USDA benefits subject to highly erodible and wetland compliance, except for federal crop insurance or CFAP, only has interest in land devoted to agriculture, which is exclusively used for perennial crops, and is not converted to wetland after December 1985. Producers meeting the parameters of 7B, so the ones that have aquaculture, livestock, or nursery, can certify on the 1026 with box 5A. And then people who cannot certify to either one of those two things will potentially need to complete the entire form. It will not delay your payment. You can certify on the form, and you can then have your farm records set up at a later date. We will have to add you to a farm, but you do not have to be on the farm in order to receive your payment at this point. Pending NRCS technical determinations of whether or not the land is highly erodible will not hold up payments, and producers making a certification of compliance regardless of the fact they may have pending determination and need to be recorded as certified. So you will be certified. And if you have affiliates, in box 4 of the 1026, you can list it as no affiliates. If it is not applicable, you only have an affiliate if you have if somebody has separate farming interests from you that you are affiliated with. Again, for any assistance with that form, we'll be more than happy to help you. It is the one that causes the most questions. So I'm going to begin with the application for what you all have come and requested the information on. The dairy production portion of the application. Eligible dairy operations are dairy operations who produce milk for the following months, January, February, and March of 2020. And if you quit milking in any one of those months, you're still eligible for the pounds that you produced in any of those months. Eligible milk production is the milk you produce, any dumped milk, and then any production that was subject to price risk. And if you participate in the Dairy Margin Coverage or DMC program through FSA or Dairy Revenue Protection Program or other revenue insurance policy, you are eligible for CFAP. But if you forward contracted your milk, you will have to remove that amount from your pounds. So an example of this for the subject to price risk, Joe the dairyman markets 5 million pounds of milk production per month for January, February, and March. But Joe has part of his milk production not subject to price risk by forward contracting the milk on 2 million pounds. The forward contract milk production will be subtracted from the 5 million pounds, and so his production will be for January 3 million pounds, February 3 million pounds, and March 5 million pounds. So if you forward contract and you have questions, feel free to call your FSA office and they will tell you what is eligible and what is not. Information used for certification, you will self-certify. You do not have to provide this to your FSA office until you are pulled for a spot check or the COC requested. You just need this information if you are pulled. You can utilize your marked milking statements. I know that DFA was saying that they would provide letters to producers. You can just keep those in a file. Records of dumped milk not listed on the marketing statements, and then milk production subject to price risk, such as a forwarding contract to basically justify why you reduced your amount. And a reminder, the documents are not required to be provided at sign up because it is a self-certification. You do not have to bring them in. Joint venture dairy operations or members of operations that do not have a tax ID number will apply for CFAP separately, and they will apply using their applicable pounds of milk per their share of the dairy operation. And producers will enter their applicable pounds in item 7 for January, item 8 for February, and item 9 for March. So whatever the total amount was in each of those timeframes. CFAP payments for eligible milk production will be the sum of the results of the following two calculations. This is how it's figured. You do not have to figure out your own, but many people do want to know how the payment is calculated. For Part 1 of the CARES Act, January, February, and March milk production in total pounds is multiplied by 0.0471. And Part 2, the CCC, January, February, and March 2020 milk production total pounds is multiplied by 1.014 and by 0.0147. The sum of those two items put together is your total payment rate for dairies. So that is all I have on the dairies. Basically, you put in your pounds of milk and it's fairly simple. I'm going to move on to the non-specialty crops and wool. So what are the eligible commodities under the non-specialty crops? The eligible commodities are specifically malting barley, not feed barley, canola, corn, upland cotton, millet, oats, sorghum, soybeans, sunflowers, durum wheat, hard red spring wheat, and wool. Eligible types and intended uses can be asked by the county offices, and any of the crops that were intended for grazing are not eligible for CFAP. So how are the eligible commodities determined, you ask? They were determined by the 5% decline of future prices between the weeks of January 13th through the 17th and April the 6th through the 9th of 2020. They must have had a 5% decline in future prices between that time. So what does a producer have to furnish? This is what Part D of the application looks like. And you will provide the commodity, whether it be soybeans or corn, the unit of measure, bushels or pounds. Some things are in pounds, such as wool. The 2019 total production, all of the production that you had for 2019. And then in item 16, you will provide the 2019 production not sold as of January 15th, 2020. So January 15th, 2020 is an important day for your non-specialty crops. And production entered must be subject to price risk. So if you forward contracted, say, your soybeans in the fall of last year to be delivered in February, those do not qualify, but anything that was subject to price risk does qualify. So unpriced inventory or production subject to price risk means any production that is not subject to an agreed upon price in the future through forward contract agreement or similar binding document. And production that was appraised from failed acres is ineligible for CFAP. Silage and hay production is eligible. So if you chopped your corn, all of your corn, it is eligible. Silage or hay production that is a matter of record may be converted to bushels using the following conversion factors. Acceptable records of silage can be converted from tons of silage to bushels of grain by multiplying the tonnage times the following conversion factors. The one that is most interesting for our producers, I feel, is 7.94 for corn, 3.114 per hundredweight for grain sorghum multiplied by 100 and divided by 56. If you do have malting barley, it is the 6.47. Then on oats, it's 4.08 for oats, 5 for soybeans, and 6.99 for wheat. So an example of this is Farmer A's corn was harvested as silage, all production was weighed, and it added up to 739.5 tons of corn silage. The actual corn grain production for that year would be 5,872 bushels, and you get that by multiplying the tons times the 7.94 bushels per ton to get the 5872. Hay production is similar to the silage production. Acceptable records of hay production must be converted to bushels by multiplying the tonnage amount times the conversion factors. For the malting barley, it would be 18.49, 22.69 for corn, 8.89 for grain sorghum multiplied by 100 and divided by 56. And then oats is 11.66, soybeans 14.2, and wheat 19.97. Now we're going to move into how the payments are processed. First of all, you have the payment rates, and again, these are on the website at www.farmers.gov/CFAP. The ones that are of most interest, I think, to our area farmers are the corn ones at 32 cents for the CARES Act payment rate and 35 cents for the CCC payment rate. Maybe some oats at 15 cents and 17 cents respectively. Soybeans at 45 cents and 50 cents, and probably some wool, 36 cents for the CARES Act and 39 cents for the CCC payment rate. So for the payment formula for the CARES Act, you take the 2019 total production not sold as of January 15th, not to exceed 50% of the 2019 total production. You take 50% of that above number multiplied by the CARES Act rate to get that portion of the payment. Then the CCC Charter Act payment formula is the 2019 total production not sold as of January 15th, not to exceed 50% of the 2019 total production, and 50% of that above number multiplied by the CCC rate. The total payment is the sum of the CARES Act and the CCC Act payment. Don't get bogged down by this. You don't have to figure out your own payment, but many people do like to know how the payment was figured. So an example of the payment, this individual had soybeans. Their total production was 6,500 bushels last year. And as of January 15th, they had not sold or forward contracted 1,500 bushels. So as an example, they would take the 1,500 bushels, and then they would also take 50% of the total production to make sure that it's not more. And you take the smaller of, which is the 1,500 bushels. You take 50% times the 1,500 multiplied by the CARE Act payment rate, which is 750 multiplied by 45 to get the 337.50. And then the CCC fund payment rate is the 50% multiplied by 1,500 multiplied by the CCC payment rate, or 750 multiplied by 50 cents to get 375, for a total for this particular producer, $712.50. Again, those are just examples, and you don't have to worry about figuring out your own payments. Some other items to note is you are not required to have an acreage report on file with the FSA to participate in CFAP. So if you did not report your commodities last year, it is okay. You can still participate by certifying to your production that you have. I'm going to move on to the livestock portion.
Hey, Heather,
Yes.
let's maybe just pause for a second. I'll give everybody
Sure.
a chance if they want to unmute themselves and ask a question. We'll just, nobody has anything in the text box. We'll just give them a couple seconds. So if anybody, you should be able to unmute yourself now if you have any questions.
Yeah, Jeremy, it's Justin. I got a question there. On the corn, you talked about the silage and stuff that had not been sold as far as the calculations. What about the silage that had been fed?
The silage, you would take away the silage that had been fed, and anything remaining would be eligible.
So it's basically your inventory on January 15th.
Right.
All right, thank you.
All right, are there any other questions? All right, we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, for the livestock portion of it, an eligible producer is a person or legal entity who shares in the risk of producing the crop or livestock, who is entitled to a share of the crop or livestock available for marketing, or would have shared had the crop or livestock been produced and marketed. A contract grower who does not own the livestock will be considered a producer if the contract allows the grower to have risk in the livestock, and livestock owners and contract growers who are at risk and have share of the livestock available for marketing, or would have had a share had the livestock been marketed, are eligible livestock producers, just to be clear on those. Livestock that is eligible for this program is livestock that realized a 5% or greater national market price decline between the average for the week of January 13th through the 17th relative to the average for the week of April 6th through the 10th, and have been determined eligible for CFAP. So the national payment rates have been determined based on those price declines. And here are the only eligible livestock. I know poultry is not listed there. We've had a lot of questions about poultry, but it did not meet the criteria. I know that people have been laying out and so forth, but they are not eligible at this point. So the eligible cattle are feeder cattle less than 600 pounds, feeder cattle more than 600 pounds, slaughter or fat cattle, slaughter cattle, mature cattle, such as cull cows, and all other cattle, pigs less than 120 pounds, hogs 120 pounds or more, and then all sheep less than 2 years of age. I will go into the definitions, but many of them are self-explanatory. Feeder cattle are less than 600 pounds, mean cattle weighing less than 600 pounds. feeder cattle 600 pounds or more are cattle weighing more than 600 pounds, but less than fat cattle. Slaughter cattle, fed cattle means cattle with an average weight in excess of 1,400 pounds, which yield average carcass weights in excess of 800 pounds and are intended for slaughter. Now, it doesn't mean that the animal has to weigh 1,400 pounds. It just means that it could have been 1,200 pounds and still been fed to full fat slaughter. You all are probably pretty knowledgeable on what fat cattle are. Slaughter cattle are mature cattle or cull cows, animals that were raised or maintained for breeding purposes, but which were removed from inventory and are intended for slaughter. And then all other cattle mean commercially raised or maintained bovine animals not meeting the definition of another category of cattle in this rule, excluding beefalo, bison, and animals used for dairy production or intended for dairy production. Pigs are any swine weighing less than 120 pounds. Hogs are any swine weighing 120 pounds or more. And then lambs and yearlings are all sheep less than 2 years of age. So I'll give you a second to hear this and understand it. Eligible livestock are livestock owned on January 15th and sold between January 15th and April 15th. So your animals that you sold during that time frame, but you had owned on January 15th. Any offspring born from that January 15th inventory, livestock inventory owned between April 16th and May 14th, and livestock that are no longer used for dairy production and have entered the beef cattle market. And all sales and inventory of livestock must be subject to price risk as of January 15th, 2020. So if you had forward contracted, they had to have been subject to the price risk as of January 15th, 2020. Ineligible livestock or livestock used for dairy production or intended for dairy production, livestock purchased after January 15th and sold on or before April 15th, and livestock subject to an agreed upon price in the future through forward contract agreement or similar binding document as of January 15th, 2020. Those are the ineligible. And then the dairy cattle's eligibility for CFAP. Dairy cattle that are no longer used for dairy production and have entered the beef cattle market are eligible for CFAP. So example, your dairy cull cows are slaughter cattle, mature cows, and dairy calves, like your bull baby calves, are feeder calves that are greater than or less than 600 pounds. Doesn't necessarily have to be the baby calves, it can be the bigger ones as well. Dairy cattle used for dairy production or intended for dairy production are not eligible for CFAP livestock. However, the milk production from the livestock is eligible for the dairy portion. So any of your heifers or cows are not eligible for the livestock portion. Dairy heifers and cows, let me be clear on that. But any of the cull ones are eligible. The information required from producers to participate in CFAP will be a self-certification by the producer or an authorized representative. So you do not have to bring me any kind of paperwork unless you're pulled for spot checks. So it is a self-certification of your animals. And the following sales and inventory information is required from livestock producers as applicable. Owned inventory of eligible livestock as of January 15th and any offspring from that inventory that were subject to price risk and sold between January 15th and April 15th goes in item 21. So those are your sold animals that you took the livestock market and you have the proof that you sold it go in item 21. And then in item 22 is your highest owned inventory of eligible livestock that were subject to price risk between April 16th and May the 14th. We realize that people are spring calving and you may have owned the cow on January 15th and you have all of these little babies that keep on being born in the spring. It is the highest inventory between April 16th and May the 14th. So this is an example of the livestock information sheet. And you have the livestock and the various dates when you are filling it out. The COC will adjust it only if it's determined unreasonable or inaccurate, and it will reflect actual sales or inventory based on submitted documentation if it is requested. CFAP payments for eligible livestock will be the sum of the results of the following two calculations: the CARES Act payment and the CCC fund payment. So those two combined together make the one payment, and the payment is calculated by multiplying the number of livestock sold between January 15th and April 15th by the payment rate per head. And the livestock must have been owned by the producer on January 15th, and any offspring born from that same inventory are eligible. And then the payment is calculated for CCC on the highest inventory between April 16th and May the 14th by the payment rate per head. So these are the payment rates, and these again can be viewed at www.farmers.gov/CFAP. You have the CARES Act payment rates and then the CCC payment rates. The CARES Act payment rate is for the sold animals, and the CCC payment rate is the ones that you have in inventory. So an example of an application: DJB Cattle Company had the following livestock on inventory on January 15th, 2020. They had 500 bred cows and 15 herd bulls and 50 replacement heifers. And between January 15th and April the 15th, they certified that they sold 10 cull cows and 7 baby calves born after January 15th. And then the inventory that they had the highest day between April 16th and May the 14th was 480 cow-calf pairs and 18 herd bulls, 75 replacement heifers. So this is this average producer. So they would fill out the form by doing this. The 7 baby calves that they sold and the 10 cull cows would go in item 21. Item 22 is the 480 baby calves that were born. And then the 573 is the 480 cows plus 18 bulls plus 75 heifers equals the 573. So that is an example of how that livestock portion would be filled out. And the cows, bulls, and heifers all go under all other cattle. If all eligibility requirements are met and the estimated gross CFAP payment calculation before reductions, this would be the total payment for this individual producer. It would be the 7 animals, baby calves sold, and the 10 cull cows would equal $1,634 for the CARES Act portion. And then the inventory portion of the 480 mama cows and the replacement heifers and baby calves is going to be the $34,749. This is prior to payment limitation reductions and also prior to the 80%, but this is just an example. Now I'm going to move to value loss crops. Does anybody want to ask questions about the livestock before I move on to value loss crops? Because I know that that was a lot to take in.
I don't hear any questions. I guess go on.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box along the way too. And I did put that website in the chat box also.
Oh, very good. Okay, back to value loss crops. This is going to be a very quick section. There are none at this time. It will be determined after responses are received from a notice of funding availability. It is anticipated to be species of aquaculture and floriculture, but there was just not enough information at this time. And I will show you on the website if you are a participant that has any of those things where you can submit information. Potential payments currently on the 3114. There's the CARES Act for the value of sales and then the value of inventory, but there is no payment rates that have been determined at this time. So that is all I have on those. Specialty crops. There are 24 crops, and there's 2 categories of eligible crops, the ones that were sold. So there's 24 of those. And then delivered and unpaid or not delivered, there's 44 crops for that. Additional crops may be added at a later date. And if you have a question on the crops that were there, contact your FSA office. The CARES Act funding will provide the volume of pounds of a product that is subject to price risk sold between January 15th and April 15th. And then also the delivered and unpaid volume of pounds of product that is subject to price risk. Production shipped but not sold or unpaid January 15th through April 15th. And then the CCC funding is the not delivered items. I know we've all seen the pictures of the squash and so forth being tilled under. That is an example of what would qualify for the CCC funding. And it's the number of acres was subject to price risk production that was not shipped or sold January 15th through April 15th. That information is put in Part G. And the payment calculation for those is volume times payment rate for both sold and delivered and unpaid, and not delivered is acres times the payment rate. And the payment rates are based on the national average yield per acre per pound payment rate. Just briefly, I'm going to go over the payment calculator tool. There will be information on the website for you to assist you in completing your application. There is going to be a payment calculator tool available tomorrow where you can input your information and calculate a payment. It'll look very similar to this, and it'll capture the data off of the application, and it'll display the gross estimated payment. It'll look similar to this, and you'll have the dairy information, the non-specialty crop information, the livestock information, specialty crop, and then there will also be buttons where you can go between the estimated payment and the data entry screens. The gross estimated payment sheet will look similar to this. And then I have one more thing that I want to cover with you all. Farm loan disaster set-aside expansion is available. It broadens the use of disaster set-aside for farmers with USDA farm loans who are affected by COVID-19, and they may be eligible to have their next payment set aside. Direct loan borrowers will receive a letter with details of the expanded authorities, including possible set-aside for annual operating loans, set aside for second payment for borrowers who have already had one payment set aside, and then additional loan servicing options are available. So if you are a farm loan customer, you can contact your farm loan officer for more information on that. That's a total set aside, but also a little bit COVID-19 related. You will see this notification on all of the Farm Service Agency doors. Because of the recent health concerns, the service center is only open by phone appointments. You can call our office at 534-3104. And it also lists the application dates for the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which is May the 26th through August the 28th. If you have any questions, you can either call the office and we will return your call if we don't get it on the first ring. By having limited number of people in the office, it is a challenge to answer all of the phone calls when they're coming in. Or if you want to have an answer very quickly, you can also dial 877-508-8364. So how do you submit your application? You can email it, you can mail it, you can fax it, or you can drop it off. We have a drop box to the left of our door. You can email it to myself, Heather Troball at USDA.gov. You can mail it or drop it off to 1934 Dyerly Avenue, Suite C, Harrisonburg. You can fax it at our fax number, 855-616-1648. And then again, you can call us locally at 534-3104, or nationally, you can dial 877-508-8364. The last thing that I wanted to go over is, for more information, you can go to the website at farmers.gov CFAP, and I will show you briefly what that looks like. And if you all have any questions while I'm pulling that up, I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Okay, there were a few in the chat box, which I think either I or Brian addressed, but I just wanted to go over them.
Okay.
The 20% balance, Tom asked when that would be calculated and paid, and Brian said that y'all don't know that yet.
We do not.
And John asked that for livestock, that each animal is only counted once. So cows that are sold between January 15th and April 15th get rate 1, and cows are inventory meat part 2, but they cannot be both. And that is correct.
Correct.
So I will allow, if you need to unmute yourself, you should be able to do that now. If you're on the phone, you need to push *6 to unmute yourself. But if anybody has any questions, they should be able to unmute themselves now.
Jeremy, can you see the website that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay. Just so you all can see it, this is when you put in the website, this is what the website looks like. And as you scroll down, it lists the commodities that are available for the specialty crops that I didn't go into because it's a long list. If you have any of these between the January 15th and April 15th dates, I think that we're going to have limited because of the area that we live. It's generally cold and we don't have that. It also explains all of the information that I just went over. You can click on, if you have non-specialty crops such as the corn, and go to the website for more information there, or livestock, you can click on the livestock link. You can also go to the dairy area and it tells you about the payments. It explains a little bit about the eligibility. The payment limitation that I explained earlier, ineligible commodities such as the feed barley, alfalfa, forage crops, etc. To request for additional commodities for USDA to consider, you can go to this area to request the additional commodities. Pay close attention to how to prepare. You can prepare by working with your FSA staff by calling them and giving them the information that is listed here. Sign up begins tomorrow. You don't have to rush in tomorrow, but it does begin tomorrow. You may want to get your inventories now so that you don't forget what they are, because the farther you get away from April the 16th to May the 14th, you may not remember as well. The sales are whatever your sales are. These are the forms. If you want to click on the links, it will bring up a copy of the forms. The 902s, you can call your local FSA office and they will help you complete that. But the other forms, you can feel free to fill out. And if you're new to the FSA office, you can scroll down to the bottom of this page and put in your state and county, and it will tell you your local service center. So that's all I have. I thank everybody for joining us and I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Jeremy, do you have anything to add? I thank you for basically doing this for us and allowing everybody to hear about the program.
I guess I'm muted. There we go. Thank you for doing this, Heather. I put in the chat box my email. Will you be able to share these slides with me, Heather, and then I can send them out to people who want them?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So if you want the slides, either contact Heather directly or you can contact me and I can send them to you. This presentation will be posted tomorrow, and I can also, if you give me your contact, I can send the direct link tomorrow, but I'll be posting it on Facebook and have that available sometime tomorrow. So I'm trying to look through the chat box here to see if there's any questions we didn't address. A couple of them were addressed. What's the definition of slaughter cattle versus 600 plus feeder cattle?
The definition, basically, anything that you are fed ready for slaughter are the slaughter fat cattle. And then it varies, the 600 plus, anything that is not quite fed out yet.
Tom had a question. How soon will payment be out?
If you get your application in, we will process it as quickly as possible. And they are saying within 7 to 10 days, basically. Okay.
I had another question about tobacco farmers. I know you said there's a possibility of other crops being added later on. Is it possible that tobaccos can get added later on, or?
I have not heard that, but if they go to the website and can, argue that they have had that 5% or more loss during that time frame, they, basically you can go to the website and argue that if you so choose.
Okay. All right. If anybody else has a question, you should be able to unmute yourself. If not, thank you for attending today and taking the time out of on your holiday. And thanks so much, Heather, for doing this today. And I will have this posted probably tomorrow. And again, if you want the slides directly, either email Heather or myself, and my email is in the chat box there. So thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you all.